and welcome to our new edition of the Love and Justice Report. This time we are bringing you a number of short pieces produced by Brave New Films and a couple of other goodies. The show is divided into three parts. In the first, we focus on racism and white privilege through videos about institutionalized racism, the stop and frisk problem, and the militarization of local police forces. There's also a Democracy Now! Report on last year's local Black Lives Matter conference, and a video of Macklemore's rap on white privilege, featuring highlights from Cleveland demonstrations. The second segment focuses on the criminalization of mental illness. The third piece exposes corporate profiteers and border security. Well, here we go. See you in a little while.
That can bar them from housing, jobs, credit, a whole range of occupations.
I mean, for a bag of weed, they think it's a joke. It's not a joke playing with people's freedom.
There's absolutely no precedent. There's no precedent in New York City. There's no precedent in the United States. There's no precedent anywhere in the world. Singapore doesn't do this.
It's criminalizing a generation of young people.
Marijuana arrests do not reduce drug use. They do not reduce marijuana use, and they do not reduce crime.
Treat the citizen like a citizen. Somebody has to do something about it. You know, it needs to be stopped.
I got arrested about 34 times due to drugs, over and over again.
In Ferguson, Missouri,
Unarmed black teenager shot by a white cop. A peaceful protest quickly evolved
between protesters and police in riot gear.
a small army on the streets.
dressed in military-grade body armor, carrying assault rifles, rolling around in armored vehicles.
It's completely excessive.
Ferguson, Missouri. Population 21,000. Why in the world do their police look like this? Why are they driving a $300,000 armored vehicle through the suburbs? And it's not just Ferguson. Police are being militarized all over the country. Does Keene, New Hampshire, population 23,000, also need that ballistic engineered armored response counterattack truck? How about Coleman County, Alabama, population 14,000? Do they need a mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle? Does Montgomery County, Texas Sheriff's Department need a $300,000 drone? Why do the Fargo, North Dakota police look more like soldiers fighting overseas? How did local police all over America become hostile military forces? Because the federal government has been spending billions of dollars making them that way. They said it was to make us safer, to protect us from criminals and terrorists. But is that really what's going on? After America launched the so-called war on drugs, drug dealers and thugs became public enemy number one. So Congress came up with a series of programs that allowed the military to give $700 million worth of equipment to local police forces. Ammunition, machine guns, armored cars, even aircraft. All these weapons that were designed for the battlefield came to a main street near you. Then the Justice Department provided grants that allowed police to buy even more equipment. That was another $1 billion per year by the late 1990s. After the September 11th attacks, we launched a new war. This time it was the war on terror. Like drug dealers, terrorists could be lurking behind every corner.
Because a terror attack could come from anywhere and anyone.
So the new Department of Homeland Security granted even more money to law enforcement, a total of $35 billion. When you keep declaring wars at home, it's no wonder the police become warriors. All this because the federal government is sending billions of dollars of arms to police forces who don't need them, aren't trained properly, and are all too eager to use their toys on the people they're supposed to protect. Do these images look familiar? Some of the same gear hit the streets of Ferguson, Missouri in August of 2014. It's time to shut these programs down. Help stop police militarization. Click here.
Cleveland, Ohio, where about 1,000 Black Lives Matter supporters gathered for an historic conference to raise national attention about police brutality and other pressing issues, including immigration rights, economic justice, and LGBTQ rights.
I'm with several different organizations. Right now, I currently teach social justice with Sadie Nash Leadership. We've been through a lot this year, since August and before then. And it's trauma compounded on trauma for people who are in Black communities, right? So this has been a learning space, a healing space, a politicizing space, a radicalizing space. We get to love upon each other, affirm each other, check each other, hold each other accountable, and I think that's really important as sustaining us moving forward. There is collective healing and not having to worry about filtering yourself or worrying about, at least in some instances, not feeling unsafe, right? Because you're amongst family.
Marshall Edward Conway, a former political prisoner for the last 44 years. I don't believe that Black freedom can exist without world freedom. We need to free the planet. We need to free the human race. We need to work together across all the different lines, and it is only because of creating a space for everybody to be a human being can we be a human being and have Black freedom. We need to work together. For years, women has been taking the lead in this. We need to involve ourselves. We need to engage ourselves. We need to put aside our moralistic or ideological differences and realize that as a Black community, we are all under threat. We're under the threat of genocide. We're under the threat of mass incarceration. We're under the threat of impoverishment. And we definitely have a community that's collapsing. And if we don't come together, reach out to the youth, to the elders, to every segment of the community, then we're going to be in real trouble.
My name is Bree Campbell, and I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I work for the University of Michigan Sex Lab, and I am a fellow at the National LGBTQ Task Force. I'm a trans woman of color, and I wanted to make sure that in this movement that we are included because we are left out of a lot of things, and it's really sad that there are times when I want to express the sorrow that's going on for people of color in the community, but feel very left out a lot of times when it comes to conversations about like Black Lives Matter, violence against women, violence against trans women. So I'm here not only to build capacity, but I'm also here to make sure that trans voices are brought to the table.
Hello again. I hope you found that material useful to you. Now we turn to another issue affecting millions of our citizens each year. For all of my childhood, my great-aunt Patsy was locked up. Not in prison, but it might as well have been. She was locked in what people used to call a loony bin. It was a mental institution that was referred to by most people as Turney Road, for the name of the street it was on. Like tens of thousands of people who suffered from mental illness over 100 years in this country, Patsy was warehoused in a hospital, drugged up, and kept away from her family for most of her life. Finally, beginning in the 1960s, our society decided to deinstitutionalize mental illness. We closed down a bunch of hospitals and started funding community mental health facilities to provide comprehensive services for those diagnosed with mental illness. Probably a good idea. But by the 1980s, we started cutting the funding for those facilities and for any innovative programs that might be of any assistance. A sizable portion of the homeless now are mental ill citizens not getting the support they need. This film illustrates the additional difficulties they face as untrained police treat them as violent criminals.
We see it every day, on the news, in the media. Confrontations between people with mental illness and authorities. In the worst cases, these encounters end in tragedy. Or people with mental health issues find themselves being run into a dysfunctional prison system instead of getting the appropriate care.
Stress can be really bad for people with mental illness. And then it happened. I had a psychotic break. And I never thought that could have happened to me. I had symptoms of a lot of different mental health issues, anxiety, depression, mania, all kinds of stuff. But I had never heard a voice before, and that happened. I had never had a delusion. I began thinking I was God. I could not make that delusion go away, and I started believing it. And when I heard the voice, I knew I was in serious trouble, and I knew I needed to get help. I ended up threatening to harm this woman who I wasn't even mad at, but in a delusional mental state, I was just doing things that didn't make any sense.
A young man, homeless and schizophrenic, beaten to death.
Police shooting death of a mentally ill man in Miami Gardens.
The police department had not properly trained officers.
Kwanya, a mentally ill 17-year-old girl who was killed by police in Texas.
The death of a 26-year-old man while in the custody of deputies has been ruled a homicide. The victim, Robert Saylor, had Down syndrome.
There are a series of trainings that law enforcement need, that exist, that are great. One is CIT, Crisis Intervention Training. This is specifically to train officers on how to identify people with mental illness, how to intervene in a way that does not escalate. You're not barking commands, you're not immediately escalating to physical confrontation, and you're trying to help de-escalate the situation. You're calming the situation and trying to immediately get that person to a place of help.
So whether we like it or not, police officers have become the first responders to mental health crisis in the neighborhood. So we were seeing like people living with mental illness were being locked up because of their mental illness.
You see the man in the green we now know is 35-year-old Glenn Broadnax lie down in the middle of the street. After that, he starts to run out into traffic with police on his tail. Then the shots.
Oh my God! Go, 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 go! Just say, get out, get down, get down!
But because the NYPD have not had the training to work with people with mental illness, they can't differentiate a person with mental illness with, someone who's really trying to actually hurt someone. I was here with my cousin when I realized, oh my gosh, we're in the middle of a shooting. So we were literally here, like standing here, and I realized that we're in the middle of a shooting. I grabbed my cousin and I just said, let's run. And as we ran this way, that's when the bullet hit me.
Okay, here, dude. Here, just come. Please, come on. Please don't, dude. Please.
Hypervigilance in the sense of who you may normally think is there to protect you may be the police. You in fact may see them as people who are against you. Previous exposure to trauma really can lead people to feel unsafe, and that would include the police. And heaven forbid they are arrested and treated in a certain way, then that just reinforces who you can really trust.
Show me your hands. Show me your hands. Show me your hands. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Bring it on. Drop the knife. No. Drop the knife. No. Drop the knife. Oh, shit. Shots fired. Don't move. Don't move. Hey.
They all knew that I was suffering from a mental health problem. That's the only thing that hurt me, and that's why I'm so committed to crisis intervention training, is because if I had been diverted to a mental hospital, I wouldn't have a felony on my record, and I would have immediately gotten treatment. Because when I did get treatment, finally, when I got medication that worked, I came out of the delusion, and I was so sorry. Everything came around, but that police intervention is so important when the police are trained to deal with mental health crisis, and they can actually get somebody to a mental hospital as opposed to taking somebody to jail.
Prison. The last stop on a long line of bad encounters for individuals who suffer from mental illness. It seems crazy to treat a health issue this way, doesn't it? After all, we don't send people to jail for having cancer. And yet we criminalize the mentally ill for a disease that produces behaviors that are completely beyond their control.
They would come with a straitjacket, or the boom squad would come, and if you were, fighting back, they'd maybe try to get you upside down, any way to restrain you. And sometimes people will have a fractured arm by it. If you was real rough and you're going off, you're having a manic moment, and you hit one of them, they might snuff you, kick you. I mean, I out of my whole 18 years, I did a total of approximately 4 years in solitary confinement.
The prison system is ill-equipped to treat people with mental illness. guards resort to abuse to force compliance. Medical care, including vital medication and therapy, are more often than not neglected. This lack of care leads to horrific encounters which defy our very sense of human decency.
1 out of every 3 inmates in Tennessee prisons is mentally ill. Jason Toll was one of them. In August 2010, officers at River Bend, armed with tasers and shock shields, forced Jason Toll out of his barricaded cell. They then carried him out of the cell to an unlit prison yard and restrained him with shock shields.
We need to, as much as possible, decriminalize mental health challenges, right? And there are many people who come into custody, who come into the criminal justice system, largely because of their mental health challenges. And we need to identify that, not that we need to excuse crime or excuse certain behavior that needs intervention, but we need to understand how ineffective criminal justice involvement, especially incarceration, is for folks with mental health challenges.
Pete Early has written books about the treatment of people with mental illness.
This is somebody who needed help for her mental illness. She didn't need punishment, and she ended up dead.
Early says instead of helping McKenna, they put her in isolation for a week before the day they tried to transfer her.
It is not good for anyone's mental health to be in solitary confinement. It's not good for anyone's mental health to be isolated from other people for any length of time, even a very brief period of time.
So that's a big problem. The DAs and the judges don't know anything about people with mental illness, and they're really punishing people. And as I said before, put it on camera. It's all about money and jobs.
The fact that you're profiting from someone's incarceration causes an issue, because at the end of the day, the motive is to make money and to make a profit. And so in that sense, these corporations are incentivized to fill the beds. And so there's no incentive to decarcerate. There's no incentive to rehabilitate.
Inmates are enduring, quote, barbaric and horrific treatment and living in a perpetual state of crisis. The lawsuit alleges that instead of the medical care these people are supposed to receive, specifically at this facility, the prisoners' health needs are instead ignored and underfed. It was a desperate attempt, we think, to escape the conditions inside the East Mississippi Correctional Facility. That's a for-profit prison where the mentally ill are being housed.
They had my son on the ground. They had one boot was on his neck, another boot was kicking him and hitting him, and there was a boot also on his head, and he had a huge swelling and marks all over, and they would not get him medical help until they pushed the swelling on his head down with their physical hands, and then got him ice and forced it on his head, and pressing it very hard.
It's such a traumatic experience that you're like walking around in a daze. Prison guards, sheriffs, they don't understand that. So they think that you're actually being rebellious or that you're being defiant. And so you get a lot of abuse. I mean, because if you don't answer them or you don't do what they say, they have other ways of making you do what they want. And because you're not reacting in a way that they would want you to react, the abuse keeps on coming until they either give up or they just throw you in a cell and say, forget it.
What I probably urge is any authorities that have oversight to areas where they incarcerate other people to use the least restrictive measures possible to provide the safety of the other inmates and their staff, but also to respect the human rights and the human needs of that prisoner, him or herself, because that's very important.
I ended up getting out of Building 9, where they kept the mental patients, and was allowed to live in general population. And I was fine until, they would mess with me. And when they would mess with me, we had a lot of racism going on. We had a lot of officers that were from upstate. And one guy had a baby, a black baby, tied to a tree with a noose around his neck. And he would stand in the mess hall. We would come through the mess hall, and he would be standing there like this. And we're walking by. When you have a mental diagnosis in the institution, we all stay together. So it's like you have to walk in one line. And you're walking, and just imagine, you see the officer, sergeant, standing up there with a black baby tattooed on a tree with a noose around his neck. I don't know about nobody else, but it was a trigger for me. And I walked over to him and I said, how did you stand here like that? And he said, get away from me, nigger. That's what he said. And he raised his hand up like he was going to hit me.
Is this a humane or compassionate way to treat another human being suffering from a terrible affliction? Prison makes mental health conditions much, much worse. And in doing so, we've turned a public health problem into a criminal one. It's time for us to rethink how we approach mental health.
I was able to walk out the gates of Bedford Hills after 18 long years. And I thought that I was okay in there. I thought that I was as normal can be. But the day that they opened up that gate, I realized that I wasn't well. After being incarcerated for 18 years, it took me 3 hours to leave off those grounds. I just could not put one foot in front of the other, go outside that gate. I kept looking at the gate and me. And that is because that's all I've seen for so many years was me in a bar, me in a gate, me in a needle, me in a pill. And to know that I had freedom from all of that right now was just too much.
Release from prison, the end of a long, terrible nightmare for individuals who suffer from mental illness. Sadly, however, for many, the end of a prison term does not mean freedom. Instead, it's part of a vicious cycle that sends them right back to incarceration.
So I know I lost my house, I lost my car, I lost every position I ever owned. So when I came back out, I was on the street pretty much. I was pregnant and on the street. And I remember going to shelters. I couldn't get into some of the shelters out there. I was having troubles. Everything I was trying to do. I knew I was court ordered to do a program without ID, without this, without that. No one would just accept me into their program. So I was going through the motions, trying to get the ID, trying to get this, just to get set up to do what the court was asking me to do. But before that could happen, I wound up getting arrested again.
Probation and parole in America traditionally has been the trail 'em, nail 'em, jail 'em approach. Supervise them, catch them doing wrong, and lock them back up.
Nonprofits are absolutely critical to the functioning of these systems and provide incredibly important services.
We think that people are best served by community-based services where people live in least restrictive setting possible and receive their treatment in the community. And so these are the services that are being cut and have been cut for years. Mental health is the first thing on the chopping block, and so we see over and over again, you know, the really cost-effective programs are the ones being cut.
So what you see is a community that is without mental health services, which once again is going backwards. At one time, each community had its own mental health center that was sponsored by the city. It was just like you have a city clinic or a community clinic, they also had a mental health treatment center. And those things have been absolutely wiped out.
Housing is one of the number one things you hear. Living in the shelter, people have told me that being in the shelter feels just like jail. The conditions are so poor that it feels so unsafe.
It gets very difficult for folks to address any issue without knowing where they're going to sleep at night. That's one of the reasons why we got housing. I'd love to have, instead of sitting here telling you 126 units of housing, I'd love to be able to sit here and say I have 1,000 units, and that probably wouldn't be enough.
There's also built into the program, and everybody, no matter whether you're a community bed, which is people that are just low income, that have a job, that are functioning, that are working well, they can access those services, and people that are here that are on a mental health program or on substance abuse program and have, as a result, have gotten into this wonderful housing, they also can access it. So everybody gets the service across the board.
And I just found myself in a world that didn't understand me. I didn't understand it. I didn't know how to cross the street. I didn't know how to use a cell phone. I didn't know how to use a microwave. And how do you tell people that you don't know how to do these things? I no longer knew how to live among New York, people that never sleep. I couldn't do it. I felt like I wanted to kill myself. I contemplated going back to Bedford and asking them, can I come back? And I could live in prison. I did it. My mom was gone, my grandparents were gone, everyone that was dear to me that helped Stacy was gone.
Then discharge has to be more about integration into community, not just here are your pills, come to see your PO this particular day, see you in a week. But a full understanding of what does it take to be in the community and stay in the community. Housing, yes. Benefits, yes. How are you going to live and eat? Absolutely. But the other things are, how do you build community? How do you build your natural strength, the natural supports in your life? Those are the things that really keep you out.
People are ending up in crisis on the street because they aren't able to get their community-based mental health services. They aren't able to get the treatment they need. So whether we like it or not, police officers are now needing to fill this role of like a community social worker, right? Community mental health professional.
The current way in which we administer mental health treatment has failed in America, and we've relied upon the criminal justice system to be the safety net, and that's a horrible safety net.
But it doesn't have to be this way. Reform of probation, community-based services, housing. In 2014, Mayor de Blasio convened a special task force to look at many of these issues. The solutions are obvious.
What the task force gives us an opportunity to do, though, is amp it up. There's going to be 350 officers trained by the end of summer. Those officers will be in the location in the precincts that are around the first diversion center, where we can hook you up with care and really get you some help. As opposed to taking them to jail. So we're putting the diversion center and the training together. They work hand in glove. And we think that that's going to have a real impact on officers feeling like they have more tools.
Get treatment to people who have mental health conditions early on in the process so that people like me don't slip through the cracks like I did back in 2010.
We need good quality care. When rich people have mental health breakdowns, they get good quality residential care. And there's enough medical money, the Affordable Care Act has helped with this a bit, that we can provide good quality care residentially on a short-term basis, but also day treatment in the community. We should have teams that go into the community, into people's homes, communities, neighborhoods, to provide crisis intervention, to provide ongoing treatment.
And so it just shows again that like we're setting ourselves up for failure. If we don't have the community supports, what do you expect people to do?
So I think it's important that we give good services and good recognition to mental health challenges at every step of the way, before a person comes into the criminal justice system, while they're in that system, and after they leave that system.
Ultimately, we need to rethink how we view mental illness in this country. We need to treat it as a public health concern, not a criminal justice issue.
That's a real challenge for us all. Our final segment this time addresses the multi-billion-dollar business of border security. With Republican presidential candidates apparently in the pockets of the security firms, scaring people every day about the non-existent immigration crisis on our southern border, this short film is a must-watch.
In 1961, President Dwight Eisenhower, he surprised the U.S. public, and he mentioned, was a new term at the time, the military-industrial complex.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
It was a warning that he was seeing something, this relationship between private industry, between government, between the military, that could get out of control. When he made the farewell speech in 1961. If you look in the U.S.-Mexico borderlands, there was basically a chain link fence that separated the two countries, if that.
The United States is bordered by two friendly nations. There are no fortifications on our land borders. These children will visit their grandmother in San Diego.
This idea of a hardened international boundary that needs to have agents and all kinds of technology stopping people, stopping the movements of people, is actually a very, very new phenomenon.
In the 1990s, we start seeing this aggressive new version of border militarization. And oddly enough, it was not introduced by a Republican, but by a Democratic administration, Bill Clinton's. And it was led not by some angry white guy, but by a Latino.
The sector chief of El Paso sector chief, a man by the name of Silvestre Reyes, he said, okay, we're going to change our strategy and we're going to put the Border Patrol agents right on the line. Each agent would have a station, one after the other, after the other, after the other. I believe there was about 100 feet or 200 feet apart.
It's the 20th anniversary of when the face of our border dramatically changed. Operation Hold the Line was enacted 20 years ago.
With Silvestre Reyes and Operation Hold the Line and other operations, you have de facto militarization of the border through troops, through more heavy weaponry, through aircraft, through ideas about immigrants that are now seeing the immigrant as the enemy and not just as an immigrant worker.
And this whole idea of this hardened border that needs to be patrolled, that you need to have your agents sitting their X's, that you need to concentrate technology, that you need to have walls, that you need to have sensors, that you need to stop people, that you need to detain people, that you need to put them, incarcerate them if they do cross. The idea that crossing a line is criminal was put into place in the 1990s. And maybe even now in the post 9/11 era, an act of war, so to speak, makes a border not only a hardened line to be enforced, but also a front line in a potential, or at least as it's framed in to the national imagination. The idea it's a front line to some sort of war or a war on terror.
Terrorists are crossing the southwest border from Mexico.
Illegals caught crossing are from Mexico or South America.
Mandates that the federal government ensure and guarantee that the states are protected against, quote, invasion.
And then after 2001 and 9/11, you have the creation of Homeland Security. And immigration is at the center, in many ways, of the creation of Homeland Security, the fear of migrants, the militarization of immigration policies.
I would say that after 9/11, there was real concern about terrorists coming into the United States. And so there was an enormous investment of resources in the border region.
If you look at the last, especially in the post 9/11 years, the ranks of Border Patrol has doubled. It was 10,000, approximately 10,000 agents at the time of September 11, 2001, and now it's 21,000 agents.
How much are American families going to spend to make all the politicians happy on this?
In fiscal year 2012, the border and immigration enforcement budgets were at $18 billion for that year. And that number, $18 billion, is more than all other federal law enforcement agencies combined. It's more than the DEA, the FBI, all the different federal agencies combined.
So what's the result? Are we catching terrorists at the border? No, is the answer to that question. Are we stopping drugs from coming into the United States? Has drug consumption greatly decreased in the United States because of this effort? That would be, the answer to that would be no.
As the United States declines economically, the border rises. The drones get more sophisticated. The National Guard becomes more present by the thousands. That has nothing to do with immigrants and everything to do with security of elite interests that are losing control of the economy and of the political system.
Our border with Mexico is the target of a push by members of Congress who want a dramatic increase in agents, technology, and fencing.
The price tag for securing the border? Roughly $30 billion.
This is about securing the border first.
10 of the top 13 cities at the border have been certified safe by the FBI and other law enforcement agencies. So the border is safe.
Apprehensions are now at the lowest level they've been since the 1970s. I mean, this is, we've spent a lot of money on this already, and we are not at a point in which spending a lot more money is going to bring a different result.
So when you read the 800, 1,200 pages of comprehensive immigration reform in 2004 and 2013, they all have one thing in common. There's a big focus on border security, which is code for border militarization.
The idea of the bring the battlefield to the border is very present.
Companies from the United States that were profiteering in Afghanistan and Iraq are now profiteering off of immigration policies.
They want a contract to build the wall. They want a contract to build the cameras. They want a contract to build the surveillance systems.
Welcome to the Border Security Expo in downtown Phoenix, where Border Patrol meets big business. This is where 175 companies from across the globe show off their latest weapons, cameras, and toys, and everything in between.
The international market for border security in 2011 was estimated to be about $19 or $20 billion. My guess it's probably doubled in the last 2 or 3 years. The largest market for Homeland Security, border security technology is the U.S. government, the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, Department of Energy, and others. We are attracting companies that want to come here and have their product tested by a third party, in this case the university, demonstrate the efficacy, the effectiveness of that technology, and present it to the marketplace.
The Secure Fence Act of 2006 built 700 miles of fencing along the U.S.-Mexico border, and not many know what the price tag, but it's astronomical. It's about $3 to $7 million per mile. For example, KBR, which is a Halliburton subsidiary, had got a contract 2 years ago, over $30 million, to maintain the border fence, whatever that means. So you can guess, what does that mean? What is to maintain, and why $30 million?
The current approach to the Integrated Fixed Tower Program, or IFT, is to use off-the-shelf technology that then can solve this problem of border security and detection. The Integrated Fixed Tower Project, in its first phase, is a $300 to $400 million deployment. So this is a very significant contract that's being awarded, and it will have significant economic benefit to whoever wins it and wherever they place their base of operation. We're hoping the winner will actually come to the tech park and put their base of operation here.
If we're discussing anything like immigration reform, we have to include the fact that there is a profit motive and a profit-making actor in the sphere of influence, and probably exerting significant influence upon our policymakers.
General Atomics, a company located down in San Diego, manufactures the Predator B drones. And these are drones that have been flying in the military since 1995. And General Atomics is a very large defense contractor and has quite a lot of influence in Congress. They're a member of the drone lobby called the AUVSI, And that group has quite a lot of power in Congress and pushed Congress to pass a law called the FAA Modernization Act in 2012 that pushed the FAA to open up the skies to more drones by 2015.
So when you look at border policy and they talk about drones, just don't think it's something really far from you. Drones are coming your way through immigration policy.
Customs and Border Protection says that it does not equip the drones with weapons. However, we've seen a recent report that showed that Customs and Border Protection has considered this for future drones.
They're telling us that a militarized border protects freedom. What freedom are they protecting? It's not my freedom. They're protecting the freedom of corporations to continue to profit.
Homeland Security is building a fortress around our country and making people afraid. It's telling people that there are enemies out to get them and they should be afraid of them, and the people that are deemed enemies are being abused left and right. So whatever way you look at it, it's becoming a less safe country in almost every single facet.
When we talk about border militarization, it's not just the physical, like drones, the physical small tanks. It's also the idea of militarization, the ideology of militarization, not just of the border, but of the country itself.
Eisenhower's warning, or the nightmare scenario of his warning, came true. There's no way that Eisenhower could even fathom the walls, the cameras, the technologies, the expensive equipment that's been put on our borders at taxpayers' expenses.
There is a recurring temptation to feel that some spectacular and costly action could become the miraculous solution to all current difficulties.
And remember, we have the power. We just have to learn to effectively use it. I'm River Smith, reminding you to be generous with yourself, generous with others.
We're coming to the age of compassion. It's gonna be all the fashion. We're coming to the age of compassion. Everybody's gonna be free. Coming to the age of compassion. It's gonna be all the fashion. Coming to the age of compassion. Everybody's gonna be free. No more third hunger. No more walls of thunder. No more new world order. Everybody's gonna be free. Freedom in Nicaragua. For every woman and man, freedom for the children.